Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to another Season 8 League of Legends Champion Guide. Today I'll be covering top lane Viktor, the Machine Herald.
Join the glorious evolution.
Viktor's a champion with some very good poke and kiting. His Q ability does some pretty nice damage, gives him a shield based on his mana, and when upgraded gives him 30% bonus movement speed, so he's fantastic at trading. He's then got some really good AoE burst damage which comes from his E ability, which is also great at farming minion waves. He'll be able to do a lot of AoE burst damage in team fights and take out entire minion waves with just one ability. He's then got some really good scaling, and a lot of it is because of his passive. When he upgrades his passive item, he will get a lot of ability power and mana, which work great on Viktor. Now, although he is a fairly strong pick at the moment, he still has his cons. The first one here is that he's got a pretty high skill cap. A lot of his abilities are skill shots, and he is a pretty squishy champion, so he must also position correctly throughout team fights and the lane phase. Viktor's also a champion that's very gankable as well, especially early. He becomes harder to gank whenever he upgrades his Q ability for that movement speed, and he does have his W available, but until then he will be very gankable, so you have to be very careful throughout the early lane phase. Now, as for your runes, you want to go for Inspiration and Sorcery, grabbing Kleptomancy as your keystone. This works great with Viktor's Q ability because you will get an empowered auto attack, and of course you will want to hit the enemy with that anyways, and this will give you of course that bonus gold and items. It can give you all sorts of extra gold and items throughout the lane phase since you will be bullying that enemy champion, and it's a really solid pick on Viktor. I then like to follow up by getting magical footwear so I get free boots at 10 minutes, and then get biscuit delivery for free biscuit every 3 minutes until 12 minutes just for some extra sustain. Then, since you will be starting with a corrupting potion, I like to go for Time Warp Tonic because our potions and biscuits will last 20% longer, and you'll also get 5% bonus movement speed, helping you kite in the top lane. Then, in the sorcery side, I like to go for Mana Flow Band and Transcendence. This is going to work really well on Viktor because it will increase your maximum mana, which scales with your Q ability Shield. Then we throw in Transcendence because we get 10% CDR when we reach level 10. If you wanted to do a little bit more harassment, you could go for something like Summon Area as your keystone instead, but usually you'll get a lot more from Kleptomancy. For your summoner spells, of course first you'll want to pick up Flash. You don't have anything like a built-in escape on Viktor, so if you do get caught in a bad position, you can always use this summoner spell to survive. You can of course also use it offensively as well and combine it with the Q's movement speed to chase down enemies and kill them. Now as for my second summoner spell, I'll pretty much always go for Teleport. This is because Viktor's actually a pretty decent split pusher because you can shove minion waves really quickly with your E ability. If you are however looking for kill pressure instead, you could always take something like Ignite in the top lane if you felt like you needed it to fight the enemy. Now let's look at each of your abilities, starting with your passive, Glorious Evolution. This is an innate ability which makes so Viktor starts the game with a prototype hex core that can be upgraded 3 different times in the store to augment his abilities. It's also really strong because each of these hex cores gets increasing amounts of scaling ability power and mana as well. The ability power obviously works great on all of his abilities, but that mana works great on his Q shield as well, so trading is going to be very effective as he upgrades this item. It is a pretty damn strong passive and gives you a lot of scaling throughout the game. Next is his Q ability, Siphon Power. When activated, he'll shield himself for 8% of his maximum mana plus 15% AP for 2.5 seconds and deals magic damage to the target enemy. He'll also modify his next basic attack within 3.5 seconds to deal additional magic damage. When you do augment this from your passive item, whenever you use this ability, you'll also get 30% bonus movement speed for 2.5 seconds. This shield value will also be increased by 60% up to 12.8% of your maximum mana plus 24% AP. So this is definitely your best trading ability, and this is the one you want to max first. It'll do a lot of damage to the enemy champion, and you'll take none back in return because of your shield. You'll also want to augment this ability first as well because 30% bonus movement speed is great at chasing and kiting, and you get a really big shield. Next up is your W, Gravity Field. When activated, Viktor conjures a heavy gravitational field that slows enemies in its radius. You'll also generate a stack every 0.5 seconds when inside, and at 3 stacks you will be knocked down and stunned for 1.5 seconds. When it's augmented, units stunned by Gravity Field are dragged into the center. So this here is a pretty good ability because it is an AoE crowd control. You'll of course want to be dropping this in the middle of team fights, and whenever you're trying to fight an enemy champion, use this to try to get off all of your abilities. Whenever you're trying to do objectives with your team, it's also a great way to zone the enemy as well because they won't want to enter the gravity field. Although it's a pretty strong part of your kit, it doesn't actually do any damage, so you want to max and augment this ability last. Alright, now let's look at your E, Death Ray. When activated, Viktor will use his robotic arm to fire a chaos beam that cuts across the field in a line, dealing damage to all enemies in its path. When you augment this ability, an explosion follows the Death Ray's wake, dealing magic damage yet again. So this shares a pretty strong ability as well because it has a 500 unit range and it does hit twice when augmented, so it can do a lot of AoE damage. This ability is what allows Viktor to take out an entire minion wave with just one ability. Therefore, you will want to use this to farm the minion waves as much as you can, and if possible, also position it so you poke the enemy champion at the same time. It's also great when comboed with your W ability because they will be held in place and they'll take both portions of this ability's damage. And last, we've got your ultimate, Chaos Storm. When activated, Viktor conjures a singularity on the field which deals magic damage and interrupts enemy channels. This singularity then periodically deals magic damage to all nearby enemies, and he can redirect it as well. When this ultimate is augmented, the storm will move 20% faster. It's also nice as well because whenever this damages an enemy champion, it will follow them until the target dies or escapes. So this is a pretty strong ultimate because yet again it adds more AoE damage and can be pretty devastating in team fights. Also keep in mind that this will interrupt channels as well, so if something like a Katarina is ultimating, you can use this just to cancel it and start doing a bunch of damage. Generally, you will want to combo this with your W because they will be held in place, which means they'll take ticks of this storm's damage. For your skill order, you first want to put a point into your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11, and 16. Then focus on maxing your Q ability as quickly as possible because it does some really nice poke damage and gives you a really solid defensive shield at the same time. Then we move on to maxing our E ability second. It does some really solid AoE damage, which makes it great at farming minion waves and also doing AoE damage in team fights. That of course means we'll have to max our W ability last, but take an early point in the ability at level 3 as a way to crowd control enemies whenever you need it. Now let's look at your combos, starting with your quick bursting trade combo. To pull off this combo, first start by throwing your Q towards the target, and right as it hits, activate your E and auto attack to have all three hit at the exact same time. This will do a lot of damage really quickly, and you'll find yourself doing it throughout the lane phase to get off a lot of damage in a really short duration. Next, for our all-in combo, we incorporate our W and our ultimate. Start by putting your W underneath the enemy to slow and stun them, and then put your ultimate on top, and then do that normal QE auto attack combo. This will hold the target in place to get off multiple ticks of your ultimate as well as both hits of your E. It'll do a big chunk of damage and has the potential to one-shot squishy targets. In the lane phase, farming is the first thing that's really important. Focus on getting as many last hits as possible with your auto attacks and your death ray. Your death ray is really solid for farming because it does some really high AoE damage and can kill multiple minions at once. If you do need to, you can always use your siphon power to help you farm as well, but generally this will be a lot better for poking. Trading then of course is the other part of your lane phase that's going to be really important. You'll want to poke the enemy with your siphon power whenever it's off cooldown because it does some great damage while also giving you a defensive shield which can block a lot of the return damage. You can of course add your death ray as well for even more damage, and if you feel like you can go for an all-in, add your W for a slow and stun. Teamfighting on Viktor requires you to stay on the backline since you are a rather squishy mage. You'll want to try to crowd control the enemy team frontline with your gravity field and then burst them down with your teammates. As long as you crowd control some of these targets, make sure you combo your Chaos Storm on top of it because it will shred even the tankier champions. Of course, while they're still CC'd, add your Death Ray as well for both portions of damage, and when you can see a squishier target, try to delete them with your Siphon Strike and your Empowered Auto Attack. If you are against a bunch of assassins on the enemy team, you may want to consider holding onto your Gravity Field as a way for peeling instead and not engaging. Now let's look at some of your hard matchups, and yes, I know these are the old models, but first up is Akali. Akali's a really rough matchup because she has a lot of burst damage and a lot of mobility. Viktor kind of relies on using his really annoying Q poke damage and movement speed to abuse his enemies, and as a Viktor you can't really do that against Akali because of her mobility. Therefore be very careful throughout the lane phase, and you may want to consider holding onto your W as a defensive for whenever she jumps on you. Another hard matchup for you is going to be Aurelia. She's actually a lot like fighting an Akali because she has some really good mobility and some really solid damage as well. You'll definitely have to hold onto your W as a defensive to stun her because it feels like Aurelia can jump on you 500 times over and over again. Be very careful when you are near your own minions because she can use that as a way to engage onto you rather easily. Next up we have Pantheon. Pantheon is a big time lane bully with some really solid poke damage, some really solid all-in, and a great stun. You'll therefore have to be very careful when trading with the Pantheon because his damage is pretty insane and he can easily all-in you with his W. Whenever possible, try to get your Q shield up before his spear lands so you can get a nice shield stopping that spear's damage because if it gets on you over and over again, it'll be really hard to deal with. And last here, we've got Rengar. Against a Rengar, you'll have to try to control the brush because if he's able to sit in there and jump on you over and over again, he's going to be really hard to deal with. If, however, you're able to control the brush rather easily, this matchup won't be that hard for you, so that's pretty much what you have to do to win this matchup. Keep in mind though, when he has his ultimate, his burst damage is absolutely crazy, so be very careful whenever you see the icon above your head because you're about to die. Alright, now let's finish this off with the item build, which starts with a Corrupting Potion and a Warning Totem. The Corrupting Potion's really solid because you will get a lot of sustain in that top lane, and it's going to work great with your poke damage since it adds even more burn. Of course, in our runes we did take Time Warp Tonic as well, so the Corrupting Potion is going to be even stronger. Whenever you do have it ticking on yourself, try to hit the enemy champion to apply the burn. Now for your core items, you want to go for an Iceborne Gauntlet, Perfect Hex Core, and a Rylai's Crystal Scepter. Now before you do go for that Iceborne Gauntlet, I would recommend going for the Hex Core MK2, which would be 2 upgrades, so you can upgrade both your Q and your E before you do get that Iceborne Gauntlet. This is because your Q ability is fantastic for trading, and your E will do a lot more AoE damage and will clear minion waves really easily for you. Either way though, once you do get the MK2, you'll want to go for an Iceborne Gauntlet because it works great with your Q ability since you get the empowered damage on the auto attack. Then upgrade your MK2 into the Perfect Hex Core so you can upgrade your W as well, and then get the Rylai's Crystal Scepter because it gives you a nice health pool, some ability power, and a really strong slow. This will just make it so your abilities are a little bit easier to land and you won't have to fully rely on your W. Now in between these core items, of course you will want to pick up your boots, and you do have a lot of options. If you want some magic penetration, you can go for Sorcerer's Shoes. If you want 10% cooldown reduction, go for Ionian Boots of Lucidity. And then if you instead needed a defensive option, you can get Merc Treads against high AP and CC heavy teams, and Ninja Tabis against high AD teams. I will usually personally go for defensive boots myself, and since I usually am against an AD champion in the top lane, usually it will end up being some Ninja Tabis. Now for your item pool, you first have Morellonomicon. This is a really solid item because you will get some ability power and health, and also some magic penetration, and apply grievous wounds. This will be a really important item to get against champions that do abuse healing like a Soraka or Dr. Mundo. If you then wanted to go for full on hard carry, you could get a Rabadon's Death Cat. This will increase your ability power by a percentage, so if you want as much ability power as possible, then you may want a Rabadon's. If you then needed a big chunk of magic penetration, you could get a Void Staff. This is really solid in the late game. If the enemy team does have a lot of magic resist, get this and penetrate through it. Then finally we have a couple defensive options in the Zhonya's Hourglass and the Abyssal Mask. Zhonya's is a really solid item because you will get 10% cooldown reduction, some ability power and armor, and you can also activate it for a 2.5 second stasis. If you instead needed some magic resist though, Abyssal Mask is a great option. This will give you some nice health, mana, magic resist, and cooldown reduction, but you will also deal 15% more magic damage to nearby enemy champions. Since Viktor's not a really long-range mage, he will usually be pretty close to his enemies and therefore be dealing 15% more magic damage. The range on it is pretty small now, however, so I would only pick it up if you have AP assassins jumping on top of you like Diana or Akali. For example full build though, we go for the Iceborne Gauntlet, then we choose our boots, get the Perfect Hex Core, Rylai's Crystal Scepter, then Zhonya's Hourglass, and a Void Staff. You'll be dishing out a lot of damage with this build, have a really nice slow from the Rylai's Crystal Scepter, and a really strong defensive as well from the Zhonya's Hourglass. And that's all I've got for top lane Viktor in Season 8. If you guys enjoyed the video, please make sure you like and subscribe, and visit the video description below. I have a link to all my social medias, and I do also have a Discord server and a second channel that I upload daily to now, so those are some you should definitely check out. But other than that, thank you guys so much for checking out the video. I really do appreciate it, so take it easy, have a good day, and peace.